Coming up on today's Locked On Senators, it might be the two most important games of the season. The Sens are about to host the Detroit Red Wings for 2 in a row in Ottawa.
And we get to hear from the enemy's perspective as we do a crossover episode with the Locked On Red Wings host, Brian Fisher.
It's all brought to you by Farm to Fork. Visit farm2forkdelivery.ca to taste the farm to fork difference. You will never go back to grocery store meats. This is the Locked On Senators podcast. It's your team every day.
Your Locked On Senators, your daily podcast on the Ottawa Senators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
I'm Jake Sanderson, and you're listening to Locked On Senators podcast.
I'm Tim Stützle, and you're listening to the Locked On Senators podcast.
And welcome. It's episode 744 of the Locked On Senators podcast. I'm Ross Levitan on the outskirts of enemy territory in Winnipeg, Manitoba, alongside Brandon Piller up in the Blue Mountains. Today is Monday, February 27th, and Pilsy, I don't think the Sens have had a game this big since 2017.
Wow, okay, we're putting it up on that pedestal. But, I mean, it's not that crazy because finally the Ottawa Senators are in the playing in meaningful games area. They're sniffing around. And yes, when you get an opportunity to have back-to-back games up against a division rival that you're chasing in the wildcard race, and both games are at home, you need to take advantage of that. So you talk about the Ottawa Senators. Sure, we can look at the out-of-town scoreboard from last night, Ross, and we can shake our heads and sigh. But this is a point where they are in control of their own destiny. And if they can get 4 clean points without any loser points going to Detroit, that could end up having a massive impact down the road.
It'll tie Detroit in the standings. They're 4 points behind Detroit. They have the same number of wins, but those pesky overtime losses. And you know what? There is no out-of-town scoreboard tonight. The Sens and Red Wings are the only teams in the wild card race who are playing. So this is one of those, we've been having games in hand, Pilsy. We've had them. It's time to use them. Use them wisely. I think the boys are going to be ready tonight. They're coming off a big win, a necessary win, I'll say. Maybe not the toughest competition, but you have to win those. The bottom 6 got rolling. Now can the big boys come back? Timmy Stu, no points in his last 3 games. I'm seeing a big night for him against the Red Wings, him and Mo Sider. You know, Germany's going to be tuned in to this. We'll get into that conversation with Brian Fisher from Locked On Red Wings. Great conversation, almost 40 minutes with him, talking about a few surprises for the Red Wings. I was surprised. We went through who we think are the top 5 players right now on each team. A couple surprises there, but Pilsy, from the Sens perspective, are you expecting any changes? We saw Batherson move up to play with Stützle and Tkachuk last game. You think that stays as is tonight?
I hope they go back with Giroux playing up there. I mean, that line was just so dominant. And Ross, you mentioned no points for Timmy in the last couple games. And Brady's been kind of quiet too, at least shots on goal. You guys know we love hitting the Brady over 3.5 shots a game at FanDuel. That hasn't been hitting lately. He's been a little bit more quiet offensively than he usually is. But if we know anything about the captain, it's he can bring his game up and bring the rest of the team up with him when it matters. So hopefully that can happen now.
Senators play 2 games in a row, but this time they're not relying both on rookie goalies. How are you going to start your goalies this back-to-back? I guess last back-to-back, they had Talbot play against Carolina. I'm thinking back. They've had so many back-to-backs, man. Please forgive me for mixing up them all this month. It's been wild. This is the 4th set of back-to-backs this month for the Ottawa Senators. Do you roll with Talbot on Monday? Or do you go with Matt Sogard, the hot hand?
Yeah, I'm going Talbot tonight and then Sogard for the second game. Just for simplicity's sake, you want to get started off on your best foot. I think Cam Talbot gives you the best chance to win here. So let's hope that he can do that tonight.
Certainly hoping for that. The Red Wings are coming off a 3-0 loss, but, well, from all accounts, I think, Money Puck, they have like the deserve to win a meter. And Tampa had a 16% chance of winning that game based on how it played out. So take it for what it's worth. The Red Wings are rolling 7 wins in their last 9 games, including that one that they probably should have got it better of. That old Andre Vasilevsky, heard he's pretty good, Pillsy, especially when you call him out. But all that to say, we'll get into our conversation with Brian Fisher. Couple notes from over the weekend we wanted to hit on first because we're going to take Brian Fisher right to the end of today's show. Pillsy, tell me you saw Tyler Clevin Selly after that shootout winner with the Nodak Sens.
Yeah, that was definitely a nice Selly, and hey, he's feeling pretty hot lately, it seems, Ross? And he's getting closer and closer to the possibility of signing a pro contract, so it's a good time to heat up.
Hey, that was a shootout winner. Pillsy, goalie-friendly show. 0-0 game in the shootout. Couple shutouts. Both teams get a shutout.
Nice. You love to see that for the tendies.
And Tyler Boucher returned from injury. It was 3 games in 3 nights. I saw some panic online when he did not play on Saturday, but 3 and 3, it makes sense. The guy missed 20 games. Play a game, off a game, back a game. Well, assist and then a goal in Sunday's game. So he's back, and hopefully they can continue rolling as this season hopefully ends in a championship for Tyler Boucher and the Ottawa 67s. But a couple prospect notes, couple big bangers who we want to see up in the NHL sooner rather than later. Pillsy, any notes before we go? Because like we said, we're going to hit an ad and then get right into Brian Fisher for a great conversation the rest of the show.
Let's just get to it, Ross. We got too much good stuff to keep the people waiting.
All right, let's do it. A reminder that after tonight's game, you can find us in the postcast available on YouTube. The chat is always electric, and if you miss any of it, it's always available for you on demand on YouTube and wherever you get your audio podcast. You're listening to Locked On Senators.
Today's episode is brought to you by our friends over at Athletic Greens. Guys, this is a simple way to take care of your health. It's something that I have put into my morning routine every day because it's just 1 scoop of AG1 powder into your cup of water and you are getting so much benefit. 75 high quality vitamins, minerals, whole food source superfoods, probiotics, and more so you can start your day off right. It helps so much with your gut system, your nervous system, your immune system, your energy, recovery, focus, aging, all those things. That's why it's a part of my routine and it can be a part of yours because it's lifestyle friendly. Whether you're keto, paleo, vegan, dairy-free, or gluten-free, it contains less than a gram of sugar, no GMOs, no nasty chemicals or artificial anything, and it still tastes great. It's cheaper than your coffee habits. So if you're getting coffee before work every day, why not switch it up to Athletic Greens, something a little more healthy for you? And don't just take my word for it. There's over 7,000 5-star reviews online. So right now, it's time to reclaim your health and arm your immune system with convenient daily nutrition. It's just 1 scoop in your cup of water every day. It's simple. To make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs. Ross, I'm going to be taking those travel packs with me to Cabo, Mexico, so I can keep my healthy streak with Athletic Greens going. And you can too. Not an island. We know that now. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/NHL Network. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/NHL Network to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance from Athletic Greens.
Today's episode. Monday's episodes are always brought to you by Farm to Fork. Please support our friends over at Farm to Fork. We've got a great offer for you to do it as well. Because we love our listeners and we know you love a good piece of meat, you got to go to farmtoforkdelivery.ca for premium flash frozen seafood and meats, and that way you can keep it in your freezer. You can get a big box of it, and you can just take out 1 or 2 at a time. They perfectly thaw. It's so much more affordable than going to the grocery store. There's no chemicals, no GMOs, nothing that you need to worry about. It's all good. It's all Farm to Fork. Check out their website. So easy to use. And because you're a listener of Locked On Senators, you're entitled to $40 off your first purchase by using the promo code SENS40. You can get, I like the mix box. I mean, we talk about that with all of our sponsors because why wouldn't you get the variety, the spice of life, right? Have a little ribeye, have some sirloin, get a filet mignon, impress your lady, mix in some red wine there. Oh, you're cooking now at Farm to Fork. So make sure you head over there, Farm to Fork. The products are individually vacuum packed, So only take out what you need. This is free and convenient delivery. You'll save money on gas. You'll save time, especially in the winter. It's huge. Just stay in your PJs. Hang out at home. It's all good. You will receive notifications as your order is nearing your home. So check them out and make sure you use our promo code SENS40. Gets you $40 off. That's a few steaks. $40 off your first purchase. Visit them at farm2forkdelivery.ca. You will never go back to grocery store meats. All right, let's get to our interview with Locked On Red Wings host Brian Fisher. All right, we're now very pleased to be welcomed by a good friend of the show. It's one of the hosts of Locked On Detroit Red Wings. It's Brian Fisher. Brian, welcome to the show. How you doing today, man?
I'm doing pretty good. Can't say the same for Scotty, who is not with me today, as he is still battling having no power for like the fourth day in a row here in Michigan after the ice storm came through. But hey, you guys came in clutch, offering a crossover, and here we are, excited to talk before this back-to-back matchup with two teams fighting for a wild card spot.
And playing in the same town. You don't often see that. It was supposed to be 3 games in such a short period of time right before 2023. And ultimately, another storm was the reason why that game was postponed up in Ottawa. So we'll get back-to-back games Monday and Tuesday. Great time to check in. If you missed our crossover, Scotty was with us right before the season. It was more of a, where are we at in the rebuild? Well, the Red Wings are on a bit of a roll themselves right now, 7-2 in their last 9 games. And you were telling us before that loss 3-0 to Tampa was more just Andrei Vasilevskiy doing what he does best.
Oh, absolutely. And you know what? I come away from that game. I was saying this to my buddy of mine. I came away for that loss to the Tampa Bay Lightning feeling more confident in the Red Wings than I did coming into the game, despite a 3-0 loss, because this Tampa Bay Lightning team has gone to 3 straight Stanley Cup finals, and you not just outplayed them, but outright dominated them the entire game. You had 40-plus shots on net against them. They didn't even have 20. The only reason you lost that game is because Andrei Vasilevskiy pulled a goalie mode on you. He went God mode and stopped every single shot. And it was ridiculous, the types of things he did. And I said it during the game, is his anticipation was otherworldly. Like, he knew where that puck was going before the Red Wings knew where that puck was going. And he was just always there to make the stop. So I came away feeling more confident just because despite a 3-0 loss, it felt like a game that they deserved to win, but run into a hot goalie, they'll do that. And from what I understand, it was a bit of a revenge game for him because just the night before, 2 nights before, he kind of got embarrassed in net.
Yeah, Andrei Vasilevskiy doesn't have too many back-to-back bad performances, that's for sure. Now, Brian, I want to get into the Red Wings spot here because I'm just so fascinated with what this team is going to do, because we talked about it off air. A little while ago, they were talking about being sellers, moving Tyler Bertuzzi, a guy that's a top-line winger that's kind of in a spot to be a big part of this team moving forward. And they were talking about selling, and then they end up giving Mata an extension. They say that Bertuzzi's off the board here. Hopefully a Dylan Larkin extension is still in the works. Like, where do you think the Red Wings are with this trade deadline coming up here?
I think they're in a position now where they're probably going to stand pat. And as far as the Bertuzzi thing goes, I came into the season thinking they would sell for sure, because I did think this is kind of where they would be on the outside looking in, but I figured that they would sell just because they knew they wouldn't make the playoffs. But when it came to Tyler Bertuzzi, with his contract expiring, having to give a big contract to Larkin, I figured was guaranteed, but that contract's still not inked yet. And then also young guys like Raymond and Seider, who are in the second year of the ELCs, I figure the NHL's kind of going the route of the Tim Stützle, where you give him the big contract coming out of that ELC because long-term it's cheaper. I figured that Tyler Bertuzzi just didn't fit in cap space-wise, but they decided maybe the offers weren't as good because he's had a lot of injury issues this year, despite coming off a great year last year, 60-plus points, 30 goals. He's broken his hand twice. He's pulled his groin. He's missed a ton of hockey. Despite the fact that he's playing really good right now, maybe he was getting lowballed. Maybe Steve Yzerman didn't like the offers he was getting, and then that combined with the fact the Red Wings hit a hot streak and Tyler Bertuzzi's play picking back up to where it was a big part of that hot streak. Maybe Yzerman just decided it was better for the team to make that playoff push, get that experience. Maybe if they made it to the playoffs, get the playoff experience, and build that locker room confidence and risk him just walking away in the offseason than it was to get a 4th-round pick and telling your team, I don't care if you're playing well, we're selling.
Yeah, that's definitely fair.
I was going to say another thing that really turned this season around seems to be a move to take away Ben Sherratt from Mo Sider's D pair. And now this Jake Wallman kid, he's kind of come out of nowhere and seems to be a real stabilizer back there. Is that accurate? And what can you say about that top pair since the move was made?
I can't say enough good things about that top pair since that move was made. And this is one of those moves. So they got Jake Wallman in the Nick Leddy deal to St. Louis last year. They got him, Oscar Sundqvist, and I believe a 2nd-round pick out of that deal where they sent Wachowski and Leddy to St. Louis. And, last season when he came to Detroit in those few games, he showed flashes of great break-in presence. He looked like a puck-moving defenseman with a hard shot. And you didn't get enough opportunity to see him. And then entering this season, shoulder surgery, didn't play the first half of the year. But then he comes back. He's playing on the 3rd pair. And that 3rd pair looked amazing. And he's playing with Jordan Osterley, Gustav Lindstrom, Robert Haig, guys who honestly on most NHL teams probably wouldn't be in the NHL. But he'd make those pairs look good. So he worked his way up. And now he's playing with Olli Maatta or Filip Hronek. And that pair looks good. Okay, well, Ben Sherratt and Moritz Seider have not been looking good all season long. They do not mesh well. Moritz Seider looks like he's in some kind of sophomore slump. Ben Sherratt looks like Ben Sherratt, and that is what I was afraid of. So they take him off the pair finally. They pair Wallman and Seider, and instantaneously, the chemistry was there. Watching those two play together, it's incredible because it feels like you have a bona fide top pair on the Detroit Red Wings. Moritz Seider's creativity, his patience with the puck, he's so solid defensively. Jake Wallman, again, the puck-moving ability. The shot selection is really good. He's got good handles. He's got the speed. Coming into that game against Tampa, and I don't know if it's changed since then because I believe they were out there for 2 even-strength goals against the Tampa Bay Lightning. But coming into that game against Tampa, they had the lowest expected goals against per 60 minutes out of any defensive pair in the league, with at least a minimum 150 minutes played. They were the best defensive pair at expected goals against per 60 minutes. And big credit goes to Moritz Seider, who's regained his form. He looks like Moritz Seider of last year, but also Jake Wallman, who is bringing it out of him. Together, they look like a bona fide top pair defensive pairing. And did Steve Yzerman really know this is what Jake Wallman was going to become when he traded for him last year? I don't know, but holy hell, he came out of nowhere and has been fantastic. And he's a UFA at the end of this year. And I really hope they extend him because he feels like he could be a core piece of this team in the 30 games he has played.
And you talk about the defensive side of the puck. Well, offensively, Mo Seider back to his old tricks, 18 points in his last 23 games. He had 12 in his first 35 games this season. How much of that has been done on the power play, or is it also offensively at even strength where he's producing?
It's everything. Moritz Seider, when you talk about guys on this team who have superstar caliber potential, I think the conversation starts and ends with Moritz Seider right now. And, he might not be your Erik Karlsson or your Cale Makar, where they're capable of getting 100-plus points in a season. He might be a little bit more of a balanced defenseman or even more so a defensive defenseman in the end. His career high might end up being 50 points, and that's not bad. People think that to be a good defenseman, you need to be Cale Makar. That's not necessarily true. But this Red Wings team hasn't had a number one defenseman since Nicholas Lidstrom. They've had number one D-men, but they haven't had a true tried number one D-man. And Moritz Seider looks like he's it. His patience with the puck, his vision, it's all there. And he is a defensive stalwart. If you look at any graph on any penalty kill where he's out there, the shots and the shot attempts from the right side of the zone is almost negligible. On the left side, they're there. He's just, his ability to shut down shots and shot attempts defensively is so great. And then, again, offensively, 50 points ain't too shabby for a defenseman either.
Yeah, that's definitely solid for Moritz Seider. Now, I know you mentioned the Red Wings are probably going to stand pat at the trade deadline, but if they were to identify a weakness, what would you say is a weakness they need to identify on this roster?
Oh, it's still defense. I mean,
Okay.
Outside of Moritz Seider, I feel like that's really it too, because offensively, they've got a ton of depth now, to the point where Lalonde is making tough decisions he doesn't want to do, scratching forwards. It's like, do I scratch Vrana? Do I scratch Zadina? These guys are playing well. That's a tough decision he has to make, and that's a good problem to have. Defensively, they especially on that bottom pairing. It's a revolving door of Haig, Lindstrom, Osterley playing with Mata, and it's just such a glaring weakness on this team because none of them have earned that sixth D-man spot because their play game in and game out is so lackluster, let's say. So it's been for sure, I would say the bottom two pairs, notably the bottom pair on the Red Wings defense has been lackluster. And I would say, I don't want to say backup goaltending because Magnus Hellberg has been good.
Oh,
but
my guy. That's my guy, Brian.
The first half of the season, we didn't have a backup goalie because Nedeljkovic suffered and the Red Wings suffered because of that. So, but they have a little bit more stability there, but you're still giving Ville Husso, 9 out of 10 starts most of the time because he's been so good. But definitely defensive side of the puck is where they struggle.
So let's get into this back-to-back meeting. Right now, 1 win each, Ottawa and Detroit so far. So the season series will conclude by the end of Tuesday. The teams have each played 58 games. They've each won 28 games. The Senators have scored 2 less goals and allowed 1 more goal. It's a pretty close matchup. What's the mood going into these 2 games from the Detroit side of things?
Do or die, really. This is a Red Wings team that's playing really hot right now, but everyone understands that can change in a minute. You're right there in the fight, but 2 losses to a division rival who you're also fighting for a wild card spot with. If the Red Wings lose, I would say, 1 would be bad, but if they lose both these games to the Senators in Ottawa, that could immediately change and shift gears from standing pat to selling again, because the standings are currently 62 and 64. Is that it?
Ottawa's got 60 points because you guys
points.
have a few extra overtime losses.
Yeah, we have 64 points. The Senators have 60. So you sweep the Red Wings. Now you're tied with the Red Wings in points. Yep. And if the Red Wings sweep the Ottawa Senators, now not only have you really pushed Ottawa's chances out the door, but the Detroit Red Wings hop right up top of the wild card. Like, that's how imperative these back-to-back is. And I think the Red Wings understand that, and they're going to go in there and fight their butts off. But obviously, Senators have quite a bit of at stake as well. So they're going to be fighting just as hard. And, I do want to ask you guys about how it is that the Ottawa Senators can be the 16th team in Corsi for percentage and have a top 10 power play and penalty kill, yet only have 60 points on the season so far. How, when you possess the puck the majority of the game and your power play and penalty kill are so dominant, are you not winning enough hockey games to be right in the wild card? I mean, you're in the wild card race, but be at the top of it.
Sniffing around.
Yeah.
Brian, this is a great question that Senators fans themselves are asking. Man, if you look at the numbers, it seems like this team could be in at least a better position in this wildcard race. But a big part of it, and I know injuries, you can't use them as excuses because everybody's got them, but this is the healthiest the Senators have been, and they're without their 1B goalie in Forsberg, and they're without their second-line center in Josh Norris. Throughout the whole year, Ross, the injury line of our lineup graphic has been filled with 3, 4, 5, sometimes even 6 or 7 guys on there because this team just has not had a healthy stretch together. And that's made it really hard to have consistent lines. The lines have had to be jumbled because they're relying on that top 6 so much. The depth on this team hasn't been good. And similar to what you mentioned, the defensive side of this decor just hasn't been up to snuff, and they're leaving goalies hanging out to dry left, right, and center here. So the Ottawa Senators, they've had games where we really felt like they've built something and they've got it all together. And then the next game, we're sitting there being like, this team is not even close.
Yeah, it's such a funny kind of balancing act, or should I say teeter-totter between, we're so close, or tearing down, this thing is completely useless. I would point to the start of the season after Ottawa won 4 straight at home, following 2 losses. So they were 4-2. They then lose 7 straight. They're only able to get 1 loser point out of it, and every single game outside of empty net goals was a 1-goal game. So you look at it, and just like Detroit, they have the same amount of wins, but they're further back because they have barely any of the loser points. And I know it sucks, and it's a loser mentality to rely on that, go out and win games and just get the 2. But it does kind of add up over a long season where you look at it, and at the end of the day, you're like, man, why could you not have scored with the goalie pulled 1 or 2 more times and at least make things interesting as it progressed. The other thing I would point at is a lack of depth scoring that they seem to have fixed, at least against Montreal. The bottom six accumulated for 3 of the 5 goals in a 5-2 win on Saturday night, but they've just been getting next to no production. Mathieu Joseph, who dominated the Red Wings last year after coming over in that trade, had a hat trick against them and played unbelievably well. He had 12 points in 11 games after coming over from Tampa. He has 0 even strength goals this year in 38 games. 0. And you need production from your bottom six, like Derek Brassard, who's going to be playing in his 998th and 999th career games against Detroit this week. He's been their top producing bottom six forward this year, and a lot of that production came when he was in the top six because of injuries forcing him into that role. So they need more from the bottom six, and they need better defensive play from their back end. You saw they just gave up a second and a fourth to get rid of Nikita Zaitsev. That's how bad things had gotten with him. But the problem too is, that's his value around the league. Well, the head coach was playing him on the top pair when he was in the lineup. So it was almost as much of taking away one of DJ Smith's toys of helping things out. So we'll see. The young goaltending's been a lot better here recently. We'll see what happens with Cam Talbot before the deadline. I would expect to see him in one of those Detroit games. And I mean, he's had games where he's stolen it, and then he gave away that Detroit game on New Year's Eve. Remember the bad giveaway where he literally just put it right on a tee, or he just whiffed on the puck actually and just completely missed it, and the Red Wings put it in the back of the net. So that's a long-winded way of saying depth scoring, lack of defensive awareness at times, and questionable goaltending throughout the season. But ironically, it seems to be fixed by the kids. Matt Sogard's 3-0-1 so far, 21-year-old. We call him the Great Dane, second-round pick from 2019. Danish kid, obviously. And then Kevin Mandolese, a guy who played in the East Coast League this year, he went out and got them a big win against the Islanders just last week. So interesting times here in Ottawa with the youth kind of coming up, but they're not going anywhere despite the top end skill and power play. And you talk about their penalty kill also being pretty good, top 10 in the league. They're not going to get that consistent effort until you have more guys contributing on a night-to-night basis.
Absolutely. And so when it comes to being buyers or sellers at the deadline for Ottawa, I kind of give you my answer. I think the Red Wings are going to more or less just stay put with giving them maybe a trade or two. The Senators being a little bit further back in the playoff race, do you think these next 2 games kind of will determine whether or not, or is it because the Ottawa Senators kind of bought in pretty hard in the offseason? They kind of are obligated to try and go for it here.
Yeah, the Sens are in a weird spot, Ross?
Yeah, certainly. And it's almost like where you probably don't get the Hockey Night in Canada or on 32 Thoughts as well, where it's like Elliot Friedman says, if there's a defenseman whose name's been in the rumor mill, the Senators have called on them. They've called on absolutely any defenseman that's potentially available. Jacob Chikrin with ties to the area in Ottawa, that's the one that they keep going back to. But again, he's a left shot. Ideally, Ottawa needs a right shot defenseman to play in the top 4. And if you're looking at that as a buying move, you have to look at it where who has term on their deal and who's a guy who you're not just getting for this year, but you're also taking them for a test drive for years to come, where we're 1-2 years down the road. But alternatively, we're also hearing that with the pending sale of the team, they're maybe not in a position where they're going to allow the GM to add too much term. Like we've heard Mackenzie Weegar's name and we've heard most recently Colton Parayko's name as a potential. Those guys are both signed for 8 more years after this year. So is a new owner going to want that handcuff, no matter how good the player is, that another long-term deal on the books? It's a very peculiar situation, a unique situation around the sale and where this team's at in the course of being rebuilders. But like you said with Stützle, they also have Norris, they have Tkachuk, they have Shabbat. All these guys are signed for 5+ years after this one. So where are you at with leaving flexibility for the new owners and then probably new management team going forward versus trying to get the most out of this season that lives or dies potentially on the next 2 games? So a very interesting spot here leading into the deadline. And I can't really give you an answer other than saying they're looking for a defenseman until I see how these next 2 games evolve.
Do you have anyone in the pipeline defensively who maybe next season can fill that void that you're trying to right now fill through trade?
Well, there's 2 options really, and that's Jacob Bernard-Docker and Lassie Thompson. Those guys are both first-round picks from a few years ago, and they're fringe guys. Like, they're in the AHL. They're not lighting it up. They're not forcing their way into the NHL, but a lot of fans are kind of like, okay, these guys have had time to develop. Either they can play in the NHL or they can't, and you got to trade them to bring in other guys here. So personally, I still have a lot of faith in Jacob Bernard-Docker. I think he can be a stabilizing guy on the right side. But if you're asking, do the Senators solve this issue of defense internally or externally? I don't think they're going to be able to solve it internally in the near future. So they're going to have to go out and try to get an experienced veteran right-hand shot defenseman with term.
Yes, and that is a position that a lot of teams are looking for. Those right shot coveted defensemen. Who knows who it could be? We'll find out sooner than later. The Locked On NHL Network, though, it's perfect time of year to jump on board with us because we have local experts on the biggest stories and the road to the trade deadline. When a move goes down, head over on YouTube. Let's say the Red Wings make a trade. Go see what Brian Fisher and Scotty Bentley have to say about that. You can do that for every single team here on the Locked On NHL Network. Coming up, we're going to get into the Monday game, some Locked On players to watch, some lookout players, and great suggestion coming in on Twitter at Sens Central, a segment where we're each going to, I'm throwing this right to you guys as we go. Who are the top 5 players that we're most excited about for each of our teams going forward, as some fan bases want to see how you, Brian, value the players on the Red Wings and vice versa for us with the Senators. That's all coming up. You're Locked On Senators and Locked On Red Wings, a little crossover ahead of the biggest games of the season.
Hope you're enjoying our chat with Locked On Red Wings host Brian Fisher. We got to interrupt for a quick word from our friends over at Built Bar. It's the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, and I love all their different flavors. So many amazing flavors to choose from. But what I love most about Built Bar that separates them from all the other protein bars is they find a way to make their bars taste good and then make them healthy. A perfect example is the Built Puffs. They're a chocolate-covered marshmallow. Now, you may be thinking, well, Pillsy, there's no way that's healthy. You're wrong. It's a protein-infused marshmallow. Ever heard of it? That's the Built Bar way. They're low in calorie, low in sugar, but high in protein and high in fiber. That's what you want to see. Head to the website today at built.com and check out all their amazing flavors. And to sweeten things a little bit more for you guys, we're hooking you up with the promo code. Use promo code LOCKEDON15 for 15% off your next order. Once more, guys, go to built.com. Use promo code LOCKEDON15 for 15% off your next order. It's Built Bar, the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar.
Let me tell you guys about my favorite place on earth. Well, maybe next week it'll be Cabo, but for now, it is Shawarma Palace. You know it's the best place to eat in Ottawa. There's no question about that. At Shawarma Palace, you're treated like a king, and you know what kings do? They eat well, and this is a meal for a king. Are you kidding me? Get the platter, and you basically, Billsy, what do we have, 3 full meals out of a platter?
It took me 3 attempts to finally finish it, yes, and I was pleasantly surprised each time at how good it kept on tasting.
It's so good. Shawarma Palace is right here in Ottawa, and if you haven't been yet, you have to get there now. And if you haven't been in a while, which basically 2 days is too long when you haven't had Shawarma Palace, it's even healthy for you too. I mean, look at all the ingredients. They're fresh. They're ready. You get salad, you get hummus, you get pita, fresh pita, you get your rice, you get your chicken. You literally run out of adjectives to describe just how much you get on that plate. And I even forgot the best part, the garlic potatoes. Are you kidding me? Extra garlic, please. Thank you very much. Head to Shawarma Palace at any of their Ottawa locations, from Orleans to the Carleton University Food Court. They also have one on Rideau Street, couple on Bank Street. They're everywhere on Ottawa. You're never too far away, but if you're too lazy to go there, all good. Stay hungry. Stay getting Shawarma Palace. They're available exclusively on Uber Eats, so you can check them out there. Shawarma Palace. Eat like a royal, and as it is feeling almost every day right now, it's a Sens game day, and we know that Sens game days taste better at Shawarma Palace. Check them out at any of their 9 Ottawa locations, and coming soon to the food court at the Saint Laurent Shopping Center. Go check them out, Shawarma Palace, and make sure you let them know that Locked On Senators sent you to Shawarma Palace. All right, now back to our conversation with Locked On Red Wings host. Here's Brian Fisher. All right, Pillsy. We got Brian Fisher with us from Locked On Red Wings. Check them out wherever you get your podcast, exactly where you find Locked On Senators. And man, this is a huge game tonight. We're not going to get into the wild card scenario because we're recording this in the middle of the day Sunday, where we've already seen Buffalo get 2 points, but what's going on with the Islanders, the Penguins? But we do know that you have to win your own games, and that's what both Detroit and Ottawa will look to do the next 2 nights in Canada, Ontario at the Canadian Tire Center. Who's your locked-on player for the Red Wings, Brian? Because I'm curious to see who you expect the most out of.
I think
for
it's
the
going to
Red
be
Wings.
Lucas Raymond. We were talking a little bit before the show, and he's expected to return from injury in Ottawa on Monday. So he has been, pretty important to the Red Wings scoring on that top line with Tyler Bertuzzi and Dylan Larkin. And then he got hurt, and it's been a revolving door of who's playing on that top line. And they haven't been as effective since, barring the one game where Dominic Kubalik scored 2 goals. But there's just not that same chemistry without Lucas Raymond out there. He's such a play driver in the offensive zone with his playmaking ability that him returning to the lineup just really solidifies that top line. And I think that when you look at players to look out for coming off of an injury where he missed his own bobblehead night. He even said he was frustrated by that.
Damn.
That was on Saturday. He was so excited about that. He wanted to return for that. He couldn't, but he has got a high motor. I talked about Moritz Seider being, the start and the end of the conversation for superstar. But if you talk about one tier below that, Lucas Raymond's right there. Lucas Raymond, has the capability to be a guy who goes to the All-Star game for the Red Wings, can get 60-plus points, 70-plus points if he hits that ceiling. I think he's going to be a very important forward on the Red Wings on that wing with Dylan Larkin for years to come. And I expect his goals and assists to be pretty even as well because of that. Because I think just he and Dylan Larkin, they connect, man. They connect on such a good level.
That's awesome. Kind of cool. The 3rd, 4th, and 5th overall picks from the 2020 draft all going to be in play there with Stützle and Sanderson from the Sens. Pilsy, who are you locked on to from the Sens?
I'm going to go a little off the board here, Ross, but I'm going to go with Matthew Joseph as my locked-on player. We just saw, Ottawa
Goggles.
Senators, Brian, their tradition when they win a game, it seems kind of dumb explaining it to someone who's not a Sens fan, but they pass around tanning goggles, and if you're the player of the game or whatever, you get to wear the tanning goggles. It's just a goofy thing. So Matt,
what do the Red Wings have?
So.
One?
Not that I'm aware of.
Oh no,
I don't think
no
so.
props. No
all right,
props?
that's an advantage I'm going to keep in my head. Yep,
Advantage
exactly.
Sens. Yeah.
But Matthew Joseph.
Hey, maybe they'll hand out the Sens chain. I think Hellberg's the last guy who had the chain before they ditched.
That would actually be hilarious if they did that. I would be sad, but I would be impressed with that move if they decided to try that. But I'm going with Matthew Joseph because Brady Tkachuk, the captain, gave him the goggles. Brian, this is a guy that needs a confidence boost. Like Ross said, 0 even strength goals, only 3 goals all year. But what a time to get some confidence from your captain. As we know, Matthew Joseph, when he came over at the trade deadline from Tampa, he lit it up against the Red Wings in 3 games against the Red Wings in that final stretch of the season. He had 8 points, including a hat trick. So if ever there was a time for Matthew Joseph to get hot, I got to guess it's now, and I got to hope it's now because these are huge games for the Sens. So that's my locked-on player.
You would be surprised how often that kind of stat line is trotted out against the Red Wings in regards to how the last season ended. Trust me, the Senators were not the only team. It seemed like Scotty and I were doing a recap every night about a new player who had their first career hat trick against the Detroit Red Wings last season. After that All-Star break, the wheels came off. I remember they lost like 7-6 or something ridiculous like that to the Toronto Maple Leafs, and a player on their team had a hat trick. It's just like every single game was like that for the Red Wings last year. And Matthew Joseph was no exception, unfortunately. Hopefully not tonight.
But there is a little beef, though, between the Red Wings and Joseph. Didn't he get into it? Dylan Larkin?
Oh, yeah.
That's when he was with Tampa, though, wasn't it?
That's right. No, you're right. So I don't know
yeah.
how much you guys know about this, but a few years ago, Dylan Larkin got cross-checked in the neck on a face-off by Jamie Benn. He had spent the rest of the year in a neck brace, ended his season, almost had to have surgery. So that was coming off of that injury into the new season. The Red Wings played Tampa Bay to start the season, and immediately he gets cross-checked in the neck into the boards. And so Larkin, pissed off because, again, there was no call on the play, punched him in the face as he skated by and got suspended for it. And then this last week, I don't know how much you follow Red Wings controversy and Red Wings lore, but they played in Calgary, and Jonathan Huberdeau cross-checked Larkin in the neck, knocking him onto the ice. Larkin had to go, left the ice for a little bit and came back a few shifts later. And then the very next game, against the Washington Capitals, Dylan Larkin reactively cross-checked TJ Oshie in the face and got a 5-minute major misconduct, kicked out of the game, and got a maxable fine. And then the next game against the who did they play right after the Capitals? The Rangers. Michael Rasmussen took a cross-check to the face off of Lindgren, and he got a 2-minute minor.
Oh.
So the cross-checks to the face and the neck have been an ongoing controversy in Red Wings lore for the last couple of years, ever since the Jamie Benn thing. So yes, that's the backstory to the Matthew Joseph Dylan Larkin beef, mostly going back to uncalled cross-checks to Dylan Larkin's neck. It's been a thing.
Yep. Wow.
So your I need a
who's your
locked on
locked-on
player
player,
still,
Ross?
eh? I got to go with Timmy Superstar. If he's going to go with Lucas Raymond, Tim Stützle is just otherworldly, especially since turning 21, but no points in his last 3 games. That's the longest such streak in a long time for Stützle. So I'm expecting the big guns have to come out. Look, the depth guys, we need more from them. They came through against the Montreal Canadiens, which, I mean, their whole team is depth guys, especially with the injuries they've gotten, where they're at in their rebuild. But you need your big dogs to come to play when the lights are the brightest. So I'm between Brady Tkachuk and Tim Stützle, but I'll go with Timmy right now. That top line with Claude Giroux, I mean, it was Drake Batherson on Saturday, but I think Giroux will probably be back there against the Wings. I got to be locked on to Timmy, the guy who makes things click offensively. And I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, is foot speed a bit of an issue with the Detroit Red Wings defense?
For the most part, yeah. There's
a
a couple guys that got good speed, but for the most part, yeah.
He's a guy who can put guys on their heels in a hurry. So I got to go Timmy as my locked on player. I'm going to be looking out for Dylan Larkin. You're playing for your next contract. You're coming up just almost the same reasoning. Your big guys have to be at their best when you have the most important games. And that's captain shit right there. So you're hoping that if you're a Red Wings fan, Dylan Larkin's going to do just that. So I'm going to be looking out for him. Again, he's a guy with a ton of speed, ton of vision, great IQ on the ice. So I'm going to be looking out for him going into this game. Pilsy, who's your looked out player for the Red Wings?
Well, you snagged
nice.
my
That's usually
lookout
me.
player, so I'm going to pivot here, and I'm going to go, for similar reasons, Ross, I'm going to go with Tyler Bertuzzi, a guy like, this kind of gives me Jake DeBrusk vibes, where it's like a guy that could be a big part of your team, he needs a contract, okay, they're going to sell him. And then the trade deadline comes, okay, no, we're not going to sell him, we're going to keep him. And now that that's kind of the idea, he's playing for his next contract as well, and he's been pretty solid as of late, eh, Brian? Like, I'm looking at his game logs here. Last 2 games, no points, but the Wings also only had 1 goal in the last 2 points. Before that, he was on a 3-game point streak with 4 points, and he's the kind of guy that he can play that greasy style of game and piss people off while also scoring and adding offensively. And as people that follow along with the Locked On Sens show, they know that I'm a Guelph Storm guy. I was around Guelph when Tyler Bertuzzi was a big part of that team, so I always have a bit of a soft spot for him there. So I'm going to be looking out for Bertuzzi here.
Well, too, and Tyler Bertuzzi's, it's not always reflective on his points, his style of play, because he's usually the guy who can initiate a scoring play but doesn't get on the score sheet because of it. He's not afraid to get into the corners, and he will win a lot of those corner battles and create scoring chances.
Yeah, he's feisty.
Even in that 3-game point streak, if you delve deeper and look at him shift by shift, he's doing things that are positives for the roster, the team as a whole. I think he's going to get paid in this next offseason, if not by the Red Wings, by somebody who wants that type of guy in their top 6.
And we need a lookout player from Brian.
Somebody
as well.
could,
yeah.
Oh yeah, who are you looking?
I was
going to
go with Tim Stützle, and it was going to sound like a cop out, but I mean, he's just so dangerous going into the year. When they signed him to that extension, I was like, that's ballsy. That's really, really ballsy, because he's had coming off of really just 1 good season. You don't know if he'll replicate that, if he'll continue to grow, but it's looked so far like it's paid off. 59 points in 54 games played. He's looked like a legitimate threat. But because Ross already picked Tim Stützle, I think I'll go with the captain, Brady Tkachuk, who's been equally as good. And you can never go wrong with somebody who has 61 points in 58 games played. Just, again, looking at your guys' stat sheet, the Ottawa Senators stat sheet, it's hard to imagine how you're only at 60 points when you have so many guys at or above a point per game and all your metrics look so good. And yet it's, again, I think, like you said, Ross, it's probably because of that 7-game losing streak that really hurt you. But the Senators are good. They're a good hockey team, but they're just unfortunate in that they always seem to be on the outside looking in when it feels like they should be right in the hunt with the rest of the teams. Yeah.
And early, right? So you get out of the race early, but hey, they've done what they can to claw back in since US Thanksgiving, which funny enough, that's usually what they say is like the marker for if you're in the mix. That's when you know that you are. Whereas for them, they were as far out of it as possible. And then since beating the Ducks, they're among the better teams in the league. I actually want to pull up the stats here since that fateful night against the Anaheim Ducks, who everyone is just putting an absolute beating on. Since then, the Sens are 13th in the league in points. So the Detroit Red Wings, however, are a lot lower because they had that hot start, right? They've got 40 points in 39 games since US Thanksgiving. Sens have 47 points in 39 games. So same amount of games played. But again, you have the points count just as much in October as they do in February, March, and April. So that's not me saying that these teams are in different directions, as Detroit's won 7 of their last 9, and as you said, probably deserved to at least have an 8th if it weren't for Andrei Vasilevsky last night. So I think this is going to be a great test for both teams, and one where we're going to look back in the next couple weeks and say, this could make or break. Watch, they're each going to win one game, and we're going to be like, okay, let's just keep trotting along. But if a team can put a stamp on this and win both, man, that's going to be a huge boost for their playoff percentages.
I think you could say that this 2-game series, if it goes a sweep one way or the other, would make or break a season for both teams. I don't think it's too far out of the realm of realism to say that, because the chances of making the playoffs already for both of our teams is admittedly slim still. And if you lose back-to-back games against a team you're fighting for a playoff spot over, that could the greater part of the rest of the season put an end to it, especially as the trade deadline's the next big thing. GM could decide, okay, clearly not our year. So huge implications to end it where we started.
Huge. Meaningful games is what we love to hear for this time of year, and the Sens haven't played those in almost half a decade. So it's really exciting to see this, and we hope that everyone follows along on Twitter at Sens Central, and you can follow along at the Locked On Red Wings podcast as well. Brian, we can either go first and give you a second to think about, because we're just going to throw this right at you. In terms of organizational value, who are the top 5 players in order, in your opinion, on the Detroit Red Wings? If you want a second to organize your thoughts, I think we have ours pretty well set. But it is fun for the other team's fan base who's listening to this to see where we value our own players.
Are we talking about prospects as well, or only players who are on the current roster?
Why don't we say on the current roster? I think I'm going more so on that. I mean, the Senators.
I was going to say our prospect pool is
roster.
pretty slim right now, so we probably won't be dipping into that for our top 5.
That's fair.
Yeah. Do you want us to roll first? Okay, Pillsy. Why don't I'll say one and you correct me if I'm wrong. I'm still going Brady Tkachuk.
Okay. All right.
I am. What we've said, right? And it goes back to a couple comments that we get in the mentions, Brian, how true this will ring, and maybe you have to see it the next couple of games, but every time Tim Stützle does something to make me think he's the best player on the team, Brady Tkachuk does something right after, I'm like, oh, wait, no, he's the captain for a reason. So I think it's the slimmest of margins, and I'm not mattering about like contract length. I mean, like the most valuable players on the team. Brady's still the leading scorer. He's been the leading scorer for 3 straight years. He's still number 1.
Yeah, and I was going to go with Timmy, but there's no argument that I can have, because they play 2 totally different style of games and bring 2 totally different aspects to the table here. So I'm totally fine with Brady Tkachuk being the top guy, and if that's the case, Tim Stützle automatically slots into that number 2 spot. I don't think there's any discussion there.
Where are you going for number 3? I got one loaded. Do you want me to go and you can correct me if you think I'm wrong? I think it's Claude Giroux, man. I really think that he is still at the peak of his performance. He's on the road to 1,000 points right now, 23 points away, Brian. So my hot take going into the season was he was going to hit it this year. He needed 77 points, and he's like right on pace here. And he has 31 points in 31 career games, by the way, against the Red Wings. So point per game guy against them over his years in Philly. But I just think that he's still the smartest player on the ice most times that he's on there. and he still has the skill. Like, though the slap shot goal on a breakaway earlier this year to me just cemented that he just has that it factor. Like, how many guys would have the gall to go out there after a huge defensive sequence that lasted almost 2 minutes straight and to just grab the puck, go in all alone, and be like, no, I'm ripping this past the goalie. Like, he just has that it factor. So to me, he's number 3.
I'll accept that. Now, I think 4 and 5 are interchangeable. Depends what way you want to go here. But for number 4, Ross, I think I'm going to go Jake Sanderson. Like, this guy is probably the next number 1 defenseman on the Ottawa Senators. Like, it's very obvious when he's not in this lineup. Thomas Chabot just hasn't been what Sens fans expected him to be. And Jake Sanderson, even though he's just a young rookie, you can see the makings of a true elite two-way defenseman. So I think for a team that the decor is the biggest struggle, their number 1 upcoming defenseman and a guy that's already in the NHL is very important to this team. So I'll go Jake Sanderson, number 4.
I like that. I appreciate that. But Pilsy, we can't keep Thomas Chabot off the top 5, right? Like, he's probably number 5.
I don't have him at 5.
Who do you
Alex
have at 5?
DeBrincat.
Fair. Go off on DeBrincat and maybe the worst luck season
for
of
a player
all time.
that was acquired to be an elite sniper and a 40-plus goal scorer in his mid-20s to only have 19 goals right now. I think everyone in the league would say, oh, wow, what a disappointment. Ottawa ruined Alex DeBrincat. Well, not so fast, because he has 49 points in 58 games. He's been able to step it up in other areas. He has 22 power play points, and his shooting percentage is only 9.9. I believe career-wise, his average is around 15%. So if he's able to keep that playmaking ability while regressing back to the mean, closer to 15% from 9.9, this guy's going to be an easy 30, 35 goal scorer, and he's only 25 years old. He's still under team control. He plays so well on that second line. So I think I respect Thomas Chabot, but I think Alex DeBrincat can have a bigger impact on this team than Chabot can these days.
Yeah, and that's fair. And he loves playing against his home state team in Michigan. He's got 27 points in 18 games against Detroit. 27 points in 18 games. Brian, you want a wild stat? Okay, he's only scored in 16 games. When he scores, Ottawa's 14-1-1 this season.
That's pretty important stat, I would say. So hopefully he doesn't score against the Red Wings then.
Well, the counter argument to that is he's only scored in 16 out of 58 games.
Yeah.
Right? Because a lot of those are 2-goal games. So he's only got goals in 16 out of 58 games. I'll agree with you, Pilsy, and we should caveat this. Josh Norris would be on this list if he was healthy, but we're kind of keeping him on the outside. Another good Michigan boy. Ottawa's got a lot of them. Austin Watson as well. And if you count the guys who play at the U.S. national program in Ann Arbor, I mean, that number just triples. It seems like they love dipping into that. Brian, who's the number 1 player? Like, is it Mo Seider? No doubt.
It's got to be Moritz Seider, the most valuable player on the Detroit Red Wings roster, if you ask me. Just having him out there, I think the team is more confident because you know that every single breakout the other way is not going to result in an odd man rush goal or a sustained pressure goal. He's just so good at creating the turnovers, blocking the shots, stopping the shots altogether, and then his transition game is so vital. I mean, Moritz Seider is far and away the number 1 most valuable player to the Red Wings this season in terms of like just what he can bring to the table. And I know he started the season slow, but since he's brought back and come back to what we expected and how he won the Calder Trophy, I mean, without a doubt, he's got to be number 1. I do think, though, number 2 has got to go to Ville Husso in that because you talk about where this team would be at without even just a league average goalie or even with a league average goalie, they'd be much further down the standings. The amount of games he has stolen you with his stellar play this season. Another great acquisition by Steve Yzerman in the offseason. Again, from the Blues. That pipeline seems to only benefit the Red Wings and not so much the St. Louis Blues. But Ville Husso, it's not, and we did a crossover with Nolan, who is the original host, and he went as far as saying it's not out of the realm of realism to say without Ville Husso in net, this team's not sniffing a playoff spot. Because this team's defense, especially early in the season, when Seider was struggling, this team was winning games on the back of great Ville Husso performances. At one point, he led the league in shutouts because he started the season so hot. And he struggled a bit in December, but the entire team did too. And since coming back, I mean, he's put up game after game after game of stellar performances. You know, this Tampa Bay game notwithstanding, but, you know, you can't really put the second goal on him. It went off 2 deflections into the net. The first goal was a breakaway goal. So it's like that give and take on, but Ville Husso, I would say number 2, especially because, again, you're not sniffing a playoff spot without him being a above average goaltender. And it doesn't show on save percentage because he gets peppered most nights. But his goal saved above expected is like 3.5 across the season. So he's been rock solid so far this season. Number 3, I think you got to go with Captain Dylan Larkin.
Okay.
You know, you talk about Ville Husso on the back end stopping goals, but in terms of play drivers, Dylan Larkin's the one who is winning the hockey games for the Detroit Red Wings night in and night out. I don't have the stat up in front of me, but if you were to find a stat that said who leads the league the last 2 seasons in game opening goals, it's Dylan Larkin. And I know this for a fact because I say it on the broadcast almost every night. He leads the league in the first goal scored on any given game. He always comes out of the gate flying and will score a goal in the first 5 minutes. And then the Red Wings, typically when they have the lead, they typically win those games. It's when they don't score first that it's game over. But when you have a guy who could, like Dylan Larkin, who can do that, it's looking pretty good.
What I'm hearing, Brian, is run to FanDuel Sportsbook app and hammer Dylan Larkin first goal score.
And even that, and hit the over in shots for Dylan Larkin if you can find it, because he shoots the puck. He always shoots the puck.
We always say the same with Brady Tkachuk. Over 3.5 shots is just complete money in the bank. The Red Wings, when scoring first, are 18, 6, and 7. So
mixed
2 overtime
results.
losses in there, but still, 25 times out of 31, they get at least a point. So when you put it like that, it's a little bit easier to swallow.
Absolutely. And then, so number 4 on my list, I got to go with Lucas Raymond.
Yep.
He's been right
where he was drafted.
Yep. He started, like a lot of the guys on this team, he did have a slow start to the season, the sophomore guys, I should say. But he turned it on around the quarter mark of the season. He's been incredibly consistent since then. I know he, before the injury, was back on track to break his rookie points record, which is, I believe, 57 points. So he's right back to being on pace to break that as he continued to be a really good player on the power play and at even strength for the Red Wings. So I think he's an easy number 4. The number 5, I battled a little bit about, because just previous seasons wanted me to say Tyler Bertuzzi. But then I'm thinking about it. I'm sitting here and yes, he's been really good since coming back off of injury, but he's been so injury prone this season that I decided to make him the honorable mention. And number 5 is going to go to Jake Wollman, because without that pair being switched up and pairing him with Moritz Seider, Seider does not reclaim his form. And Jake Wollman has been a revelation in his own right this season on both the offensive and the defensive side of the puck, with the speed, his handles, everything that I mentioned earlier in the show. Jake Wollman has been a massive, pleasant surprise. And I hope that he gets re-signed for years to come, because they need that number 2 defenseman position locked down just as much as they need that number 1 position locked down.
That's awesome. I think this has been great insight into how you view things from the Red Wings perspective. For people wanting more, they can find him on Twitter, Brian Fisher from Locked On Red Wings. Boys, are we thinking 1-1? Pilsy, what's your prediction for this back-to-back set?
I think it's going to be very interesting, because I think both teams are going to put their top goalie in on Monday and then the backup in on Tuesday. But if they were opposites, I think that's where things would get really interesting, like Talbot against Hellberg and Husso up against Sogard. I'm going to be optimistic, and I think the Sens are going to get 3 points in this little back-to-back series here. They're going to win the first game and lose the second game in overtime. That's my prediction.
Okay. I like that. I'll flip it. I'll say they lose the first one in a shootout and then win big in the second one. Right when they think we're out, they'll pull us right back in. Brian,
I think
how
after
you
the
feeling?
game against the Tampa Bay Lightning, Red Wings are feeling real frustrated. They know they were the better team in that game, and they need to come into Ottawa and get business done. So I actually think that they win that first game against the Ottawa Senators pretty big. But I wouldn't be surprised if the second game then infuriates the Ottawa Senators, knowing we got to win this game or it's game over. And now the Red Wings, feeling like they have been vindicated with the first victory, will maybe take their foot off the gas a little bit. So I would think that the second game be a bit closer, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's a close victory for the Ottawa Senators in regulation in game number 2. So 1-1.
All right. Well, we'll find out in just a matter of hours. We're looking forward to that. Brian, we appreciate you jumping on, man. Always a pleasure. For Brian Fisher and Brandon Piller, I'm Ross Levitan, and this has been the Locked On Senators podcast, your team every day.